She offered him $2 million for a grease-stained garage. He didn't even look up from his wrench. When the billionaire CEO laughed and called his life's work scrap metal, she thought the negotiation was over. She had no idea the single dad was about to dismantle her entire empire. The asphalt of South 9th Street was sticky with summer heat and decades of spilled motor oil. Valerie Stanton stepped out of the climate-controlled sanctuary of her town car, immediately regretting her choice of footwear. Her $500 leather heels sank a fraction of an inch into the softened tar. She hated this part of the city. It smelled of oxidized iron, rotting damp wood, and the sour, undeniable scent of financial failure. Valerie adjusted the cuffs of her silk blouse. The fabric felt like cold armor against her skin, a necessary barrier between her and the decay of the industrial district. She was 38, a woman who had spent the last decade gutting failing tech startups and repurposing urban rot into gleaming, sterile residential blocks. She owned the skyline. But right now, her multi-billion-dollar waterfront development was stalled because of a corrugated steel shed sitting on a quarter-acre of dirt. Russo's Auto and Machine. The sign above the bay doors was hand-painted, the white lettering peeling away to reveal rusted tin beneath. She walked past a rusted-out shell of a Chevy Nova, her heels clicking a sharp, impatient rhythm against the cracked concrete. Inside, the garage was a cavernous hollow of shadows and dust motes suspended in the thick, unmoving air. The sharp tang of welding ozone and WD-40 hit the back of her throat, making her swallow hard. From beneath the raised undercarriage of an ancient Ford truck, a mechanic's creeper rolled out. Dean Russo didn't look like a man holding up a $400 million real estate deal. He looked like a man who hadn't slept an entire night in 5 years. He was in his early 40s, wearing a faded gray t-shirt stained dark with grease across the stomach. His forearms were corded with muscle, dotted with pale, crescent-shaped burn scars. He sat up, wiping his hands on a shop rag that was already completely saturated with oil. He didn't say anything. He just looked at her. His eyes were a startling, washed-out blue, rimmed with the red of chronic exhaustion. "Mr. Russo," Valerie said. Her voice was tuned to the exact frequency of a boardroom execution. Polite, flat, lethal. "Shop's closed," Dean said. His voice was gravelly, scraping against the quiet of the garage. He tossed the rag onto a nearby workbench crowded with scattered bolts, stripped wires, and half-empty coffee cups. "If you need a tow, call the number on the door." "I don't need a tow. I'm Valerie Stanton, Stanton Holdings." Dean paused. He didn't flinch. He didn't widen his eyes. He just reached into his shirt pocket, pulled out a crushed pack of peppermint gum, and popped a piece into his mouth. The mundane gesture irritated her. "I know who you are," he said slowly, chewing. "Your lawyers have been sending me letters printed on paper thicker than my drywall." I told them no. Valerie stepped further into the garage, careful not to brush against a stack of bald tires. "My lawyers lack imagination, Mr. Russo. They look at property values. I look at human motivation. Everyone has a number. The current market value of this lot is roughly $400,000. I am prepared to authorize a wire transfer this afternoon for $1.2 million. She waited for the reaction, the sudden intake of breath, the widening of the pupils. It was the moment she lived for. The precise second a person realized their life was about to change, that they had been bought. Dean walked over to a heavy iron vise bolted to the workbench. He picked up a socket wrench. He didn't look at her. No. Valerie blinked. The syllable hung in the humid air, heavy and absurd. Excuse me? No, Dean repeated, his voice devoid of anger. He sounded bored. It means the opposite of yes. The property isn't for sale. Are you incapable of doing basic math, or are you just playing a game? Valerie's professional veneer cracked, just a fraction. A bead of sweat trickled down the back of her neck, ruining the perfect dry chill she had carried out of her car. 1.2 million. You can buy a shop 3 times this size in the county. You can send your daughter. She had read the dossier. Chloe, is it? You can send her to a school where the roof doesn't leak. You are standing in a dying building, in a dead neighborhood. Dean's hands stopped moving. The muscles in his back tensed beneath the thin fabric of his shirt. For a second, Valerie thought she had pushed too far, thought he might pick up the heavy steel wrench and swing it. She braced herself. Instead, Dean turned around. He looked at her not with anger, but with a profound, heavy pity that made Valerie's stomach twist. You look at this place and you see dirt, Dean said softly. He gestured around the dim garage, at the scattered tools, the dripping oil pan, a strange, bulky shape covered by a heavy canvas tarp in the back corner. You see numbers on a spreadsheet. You don't know what this is. Valerie let out a short, sharp laugh. The sound was ugly, bouncing off the corrugated walls. The heat, the smell, the sheer stubborn stupidity of the man was suffocating her. I know exactly what this is, she snapped, stepping backward toward the sunlight of the open bay doors. She gestured dismissively at the walls, at the tarp-covered pile of junk, at him. This is a failing business. That garage is worth scrap metal, Mr. Rousseau, and so is everything in it. You're holding on to garbage out of pride. When the city condemns this block for blight next month, and I will make sure they do, you'll get nothing. Dean didn't raise his voice. He reached up, grabbed the pull chain of the overhead fluorescent light, and yanked it. The garage plunged into deeper shadow. Get off my property, he said. Valerie turned on her heel. She walked back to her car, her chest tight with an unfamiliar, jagged anger. She was Valerie Stanton. She didn't lose to men with dirt under their fingernails. As the heavy door of her Mercedes slammed shut, sealing her in cold, filtered air, she looked out the tinted window. Dean Rousseau was already back under the truck. The air in Valerie's 42nd floor office smelled of absolutely nothing. It was heavily filtered, temperature-controlled to a constant 68 degrees, and stripped of anything remotely human. The desk was a slab of polished black granite. The city spread out below the floor-to-ceiling windows like a circuit board, a system she understood perfectly. But today, the system was glitching. She stared at the digital tablet on her desk. The spreadsheet glared back at her. The South 9th Street acquisition was bleeding capital. Her contractors were on retainer. The city council had been aggressively lobbied, and her investors were getting anxious. All because of Dean Rousseau. Valerie pressed the heel of her hand against her left temple. A dull, rhythmic ache was throbbing behind her eye. She couldn't stop thinking about the garage. Not just the interaction, but the smell of it. The quiet, stubborn hum of the place. The intercom on her desk chimed softly. "Miss Stanton, Arthur is here." "Send him in." Arthur Vance, damn it, Arthur Finch, was her lead acquisitions analyst. He was a nervous man in his early 30s who constantly smelled of peppermint breath strips and fear. He walked in holding a manila folder, clutching it to his chest like a shield. "Tell me you have leverage," Valerie said, not looking up from her tablet. "Tell me he has gambling debts. Tell me he owes back taxes. Tell me he has an ex-wife who wants blood." Arthur cleared his throat. It sounded like dry leaves crushing. "No, ma'am. He's clean. Painfully clean. He bought the garage in cash 7 years ago after his wife died. Pancreatic cancer. He paid off her medical bills entirely. He lives in the apartment above the shop with his daughter. He has 0 credit card debt. He barely even uses a bank." Valerie finally looked up, her eyes narrowing. "Everyone has debt, Arthur. Everyone wants something. What does he do all day? Fix flat tires?" The dossier said his gross income last year was barely $30,000. Arthur shuffled his feet. The thick carpet absorbed the sound, making him look like he was hovering nervously. That's the thing, Mrs. Stanton. I didn't just look at his financials. You told me to look at the property. So I pulled the municipal utility records for the block." He placed the manila folder on the black granite desk and slid it toward her. Valerie opened it. It was a line graph showing power consumption for the South 9th Street grid. The line was flat and low for most of the day, but at exactly 2 a.m., every single night for the past 6 months, the line spiked violently. It was a massive, sustained draw of electrical current, enough to power a small manufacturing plant, lasting exactly 3 hours before dropping back to near zero. Valerie traced the spike with her manicured fingernail. What is he running in there? A server farm? Is he mining crypto? No, Arthur said. He swallowed hard. I had one of the engineers from our energy division look at the draw pattern. It's not continuous computing power. It's kinetic. It's the signature of an electromagnetic induction sequence, a massive one. Speak English, Arthur. He's charging something, or testing something. Arthur reached into the folder and pulled out a second sheet of paper. It was a photocopy of a document from the United States Patent and Trademark Office. I ran his name through the Federal Registry. 2 weeks ago, Dean Russo filed a provisional patent for a closed-loop neodymium kinetic battery. Valerie stared at the paper. The words didn't make sense in the context of the grease-stained man she had met yesterday. A battery? Our engineer almost had a stroke when he saw the abstract, Arthur whispered, leaning in slightly, as if the room were bugged. If the math on this filing is even remotely accurate, it's a battery that recharges itself using the ambient kinetic vibration of its own output. It doesn't just store power, Mrs. Stanton. It cycles it with near-zero energy loss. It could power an entire residential block for a year off a single grid charge. The silence in the office was absolute. The only sound was the faint, artificial whisper of the air conditioning. Valerie felt a cold, sharp sensation bloom in her chest. It wasn't anger this time. It was a predatory thrill, mixed with a sudden, sickening realization of her own blindness. You look at this place and you see dirt. You don't know what this is. He wasn't holding out for a better real estate offer. He wasn't a stubborn mechanic clinging to a dead business. He was a ghost, a dropout genius building next-generation energy architecture under a dirty canvas tarp in a condemned neighborhood. "He's not a mechanic," Valerie murmured, her eyes scanning the patent abstract. The math formulas looked like a foreign language, but the implications were crystal clear. Stanton Holdings was heavily invested in municipal power grids. If this technology went to market, her infrastructure investments would be obsolete overnight. "He was an aerospace engineer," Arthur corrected quietly. "He worked for Lockheed Martin 12 years ago, quit the industry entirely when his daughter was born, dropped off the map." Valerie stood up. The city below suddenly didn't look like a circuit board she controlled. It looked like a fragile glass house, and Dean Russo was holding a very large rock. "Cancel my afternoon," Valerie said, grabbing her coat from the back of her chair. "Mrs. Stanton, where are you going?" "To buy a piece of scrap metal." It was raining when Valerie returned to South 9th Street. It wasn't a clean rain. It was a heavy, suffocating drizzle that washed the soot from the rooftops and dragged it down the sides of the brick buildings in dark streaks. She didn't bother with the umbrella. She stepped out of the car, feeling the damp chill immediately seep through the shoulders of her trench coat. The streetlights flickered, cheap municipal bulbs fighting a losing battle against the dark. The garage bays were rolled down and locked. A single, dull yellow light spilled from a frosted glass window beside the main door. Valerie knocked. The metal door was cold against her knuckles. She waited. She knocked again, harder this time, the sound dull and flat. The deadbolt threw with a heavy metallic clack. The door groaned open inward. Dean stood there. He was wearing a faded flannel shirt over his grease-stained tee. He looked worse than yesterday. The dark circles under his eyes were bruised purple, and there was a streak of engine oil across his jawline. He looked at her, his expression utterly blank. "I told you the shop is closed," he said. He went to close the door. Valerie caught the edge of the heavy steel door with her hand. The metal bit sharply into her palm. "I know about the patent, Dean." The door stopped moving. Dean's eyes shifted from her face down to her hand gripping the door, then back up. The air between them seemed to suddenly pull tight. "I'm coming in," she said. It wasn't a request. She pushed past him. The inside of the garage was different at night. The shadows were deeper, the smell of damp concrete, a metallic tang, even stronger. But what stopped Valerie in her tracks wasn't the machinery. Sitting at the rusted metal workbench, illuminated by a cheap plastic desk lamp, was a little girl. She looked to be about 8 years old, wearing oversized yellow sweatpants and a sweater that was unraveling at the cuff. She had Dean's washed-out blue eyes, but her face was pale, painfully thin. She was holding a blue crayon, meticulously coloring a drawing of an astronaut. She looked up at Valerie. Valerie felt a sudden, profound spike of discomfort. She didn't do well with children. They were chaotic variables. "Chloe, put your headphones on, sweetie," Dean said. His voice was entirely different when he spoke to her. The gravel softened. It became warm, protective. The little girl nodded, reached for a pair of bulky, noise-canceling headphones, and slipped them over her ears. She went back to her drawing, effectively erasing them from her world. Dean turned to Valerie. You have exactly 3 minutes. Speak. Valerie took a breath. The air smelled of rain and old coffee. She forced herself to look at him, stripping away the CEO persona, trying to find the human frequency. I had my engineers look at your patent abstract, the kinetic battery. She pointed toward the back of the shop, toward the heavy canvas tarp that sat in the corner. That's what's under there, isn't it? That's what you've been running off the grid at 2 in the morning. You hacked my utility records, Dean said flatly. I pulled publicly available data, Valerie countered, her voice sharp. Don't play the victim. You are sitting on a technology that could revolutionize the energy sector. You're an aerospace engineer, Dean. You know exactly what you've built, and you're hiding it in a garage that's rotting into the ground. Dean crossed his arms. I'm not hiding it. I'm finishing it. With what money? Valerie snapped. The frustration was bubbling over again. The sheer impracticality of it all offended her. You make 30 grand a year. You're scavenging parts. You're one blown transformer away from losing everything. I didn't come here to steal your land today. I came to buy the tech. She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a folded piece of heavy stock paper, and held it out. $10 million. Up front. For exclusive licensing rights to the kinetic battery. We bulldoze this block. We build the tech hub. And we make your battery the cornerstone of the entire grid. You walk away a multi-millionaire. Chloe gets the best doctors, the best schools, the best life. Dean looked at the paper in her hand. He didn't reach for it. Instead, he let out a laugh. It wasn't a joyful sound. It was a dry, scraping noise, like metal grinding against metal. He rubbed a hand over his face, smearing the oil stain further across his cheek. You think I built it for you? He asked quietly. I think you built it to make money. Like everyone else. My wife died because the hospital's backup generators failed during a brownout, Dean said. The words dropped into the room like heavy stones. Valerie's breath caught in her throat. The silence following the sentence was absolute, save for the faint scratch of Chloe's crayon against the paper. Dean stepped closer to Valerie. He smelled of rain and exhaustion and an anger so old and deep it had turned into cold iron. The grid in this city is failing, Dean said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. The infrastructure is rotting because companies like Stanton Holdings siphon the municipal budgets to build luxury waterfront condos for people who wear $500 shoes. He looked down at her feet. I didn't build it to make money. I built it to bypass you, to make you irrelevant. Valerie's heart was hammering against her ribs. She felt completely off balance. You're a fool. You can't mass-produce it without capital. You can't distribute it without infrastructure. You have a prototype. I have an empire. Dean stared at her for a long, unblinking moment. Then he turned and walked toward the back of the garage. Let me show you my prototype, he said. He grabbed the corner of the heavy canvas tarp and pulled. Dust cascaded into the air. Beneath it sat a machine that looked like it had been cannibalized from a jet engine and a subway car. It was a cylinder of brushed steel, wrapped in thick copper coiling, flanked by heavy neodymium magnets the size of cinder blocks. Wires snaked out of it in chaotic, disorganized bundles, connecting to a crude, makeshift control panel. It wasn't elegant. It was a Frankenstein's monster of engineering. Dean reached over to the main breaker box on the wall. Without a word, he grabbed the heavy red lever and pulled it down. The garage plunged into absolute pitch-black darkness. The desk lamp next to Chloe died. The faint hum of the city's power grid vanished. The silence was deafening. Valerie tensed, a spike of genuine fear shooting through her. "What are you doing?" In the dark, she heard Dean's voice. "Watch." A heavy metallic clank echoed in the darkness. Then a low, subsonic vibration began to build in the air. It felt like standing too close to a massive subwoofer. The floor beneath Valerie's feet began to hum. Suddenly, a deep, resonant hum filled the space, and the machine under the tarp began to emit a soft, pulsing blue light. It was spinning, faster and faster, the copper coils blurring into a solid cylinder. The blue light flared brighter, casting wild, spinning shadows against the corrugated walls. And then, the fluorescent lights overhead flickered and slammed back on, bright, stark white. The desk lamp next to Chloe flared to life. The radio on the workbench, which had been dead for 2 days, crackled into clear, loud rock music. Valerie stood frozen. She looked at the breaker box. The main line to the city grid was still physically severed. "That's impossible," she breathed, her corporate armor entirely shattered. "The output, without an external power source, it's looping," Dean said. He was standing next to the machine, his face bathed in the blue light. He looked exhausted, but for the first time there was a spark of terrifying vitality in his eyes. "It's pulling the ambient kinetic energy from its own magnetic friction. It's generating enough voltage right now to power this entire city block. Clean, cold, unending." Valerie looked at the machine, then at the $10 million offer still clutched in her trembling hand. She suddenly realized how small the number was. She was looking at the fire. She was looking at the wheel. "Dean," she said, her voice shaking, "we need to finalize this right now. 20 million. I will structure a board seat for you. I will—" Dean walked past her and opened the heavy steel door leading back out to the rainy street. "You don't understand, Valerie," he said softly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. The screen was cracked. He tapped it once to wake it up, turned it around, and held it out to her. Valerie squinted at the bright screen. It was an open internet browser, a public engineering forum. At 6 a.m. that morning, Dean Russo had uploaded the complete, unredacted schematics, mathematical proofs, and assembly instructions for the kinetic battery. Under the licensing agreement, it read, "Open source, public domain, free for all human use in perpetuity." Valerie felt the blood drain from her face. Her stomach plummeted as if she had just stepped off the edge of a skyscraper. "You didn't," she whispered. "I uploaded it to 300 servers worldwide before I made my coffee," Dean said. He looked out at the rain. "In a week, every engineering student from MIT to Mumbai is going to be building one of these in their dorm room. The grid is dead, Valerie, and so is your leverage." The billionaire CEO stood in the grease-stained garage holding a worthless piece of paper, realizing that the man she had called scrap metal had just dismantled the world as she knew it. The ride down from the 42nd floor felt like a descent into a pressurized tomb. Valerie sat in the back of her town car, staring at the privacy partition. The silence was absolute, thick enough to choke on. Then, her phone began to vibrate against the leather seat. It wasn't a ring. It was a continuous, angry spasm. Once, twice, then a flat, unbroken hum. The Asian markets had opened. She picked up the device. The screen was a chaotic waterfall of red numbers and frantic text messages from Arthur, from her board of directors, from investors she hadn't spoken to in 3 years. Stanton Holdings was hemorrhaging value by the second. The municipal energy sector, her most lucrative, deeply entrenched portfolio, was in freefall. She turned the phone off and dropped it onto the floorboard. She rested her forehead against the cool, tinted glass. The rain streaked the window, distorting the city lights into bleeding, jagged lines. She had been beaten, not outmaneuvered in a boardroom, not outbid by a rival firm. She had been completely dismantled by a tired man in a grease-stained t-shirt who didn't even care about the money. The contradiction of it gnawed at her. She was furious, a hot, acidic rage burning in her chest. But beneath it, buried under a decade of corporate ruthlessness, was a terrifying, unwelcome spike of awe. He had actually done it. He had killed the grid, across the city, in the damp, cavernous hollow of Rousseau's auto and machine. The adrenaline was fading. Dean sat on the edge of his cot in the small apartment above the garage. The single window rattled against its frame as the wind picked up, driving rain against the cracked glass. The blue pulsing glow of the prototype in the bay below seeped up through the floorboards, casting long, unnatural shadows across the ceiling. He stared at his laptop screen. The open-source repository he had created was exploding. 400,000 downloads. A forum user in Munich had already verified the magnetic induction math. A 16-year-old kid in Kyoto had posted a video of a desk fan-sized mock-up, the copper coils spinning wildly, lighting up a string of LEDs without being plugged into the wall. The world was changing. Right now. In real time. Dean closed the laptop. The quiet of the room rushed back in, heavy and damp. He listened. From the small bedroom across the hall, he heard it. A dry, rattling cough. Chloe. He stood up, his joints aching with a deep, bone-weary stiffness. He walked into her room. The air was frigid. The small space heater in the corner was glowing red, powered flawlessly by the machine downstairs. But it wasn't enough to fight the draft bleeding through the rotting walls. He pulled the heavy wool blanket up to her chin. She shifted, her breathing shallow, and settled back into sleep. Dean walked into the tiny, rust-stained bathroom and gripped the edges of the porcelain sink. He looked at himself in the mirror. He looked like a corpse. He had saved the world. He had struck a fatal blow against the corporate machines that had let his wife die in the dark. He was a god to 1 million anonymous engineers on the internet. But as he looked down at the leaky faucet, the raw, ugly truth settled over him like a suffocating weight. You can't eat a schematic. You can't patch a roof with a mathematical proof. He had refused $20 million out of righteous spite. He had given the world limitless power. But tomorrow morning, he still had to figure out how to pay the grocer for milk. The city was still going to condemn the block. He had won the war, but he was still going to lose his home. His hands shook. He gripped the porcelain harder, the cold biting into his palms. The romanticism of his sacrifice evaporated, leaving only the terrifying, imperfect reality of a father who had just thrown away his daughter's security for a ghost of revenge. For 3 days, the world lost its mind. The news cycle became a chaotic blur of panicked anchors, furious energy executives, and triumphant tech bloggers. The phrase Russo loop became ubiquitous overnight. Energy conglomerates scrambled their legal teams to find a loophole, a way to patent the unpatentable. But Dean had been meticulous. The open-source license was ironclad. It belonged to no one. It belonged to everyone. Inside the glass walls of Stanton Holdings, it was a bloodbath. "We are down 42%, Valerie." Richard, the chairman of the board, slammed his fist onto the black granite table. His face was mottled red, a stark contrast to his pristine, custom-tailored suit. "The municipal contracts are evaporating. The city council is halting our waterfront development to review alternative infrastructure implementations." "Do you know what that means?" Valerie stood at the head of the table. She hadn't slept in 72 hours. She was wearing the same dark gray blazer she had worn yesterday. Her hair was pulled back tightly, severe and unforgiving. "It means they want the Russo tech," Valerie said, her voice eerily calm. The contrast between her stillness and Richard's screaming made the room tense, brittle. "And we don't own it," Richard yelled, spit flying from his lips. "Because you let a grease monkey upload a $1 trillion asset to the public domain while you were standing in his garage." "Richard," Valerie said. Her tone was flat, but it cut through the room like a scalpel. "Sit down." He blinked, the command catching him off guard. He slowly lowered himself into the leather chair, breathing heavily. Valerie looked around the boardroom. Panic. Every face was pale with it. They were staring at the death of their monopoly. "You're all looking at the math wrong," Valerie said, walking over to the floor-to-ceiling window. She looked down at the city. Dean Russo gave away the recipe. He gave the entire world the blueprints to build a self-sustaining power source. She turned back to the board. "But a blueprint doesn't power a hospital. A schematic doesn't heat a residential block." Arthur, sitting near the back, adjusted his glasses. "Ms. Stanton, what are you saying?" "I'm saying the IP is worthless now. It's free, but the hardware isn't." Valerie felt the cold, familiar grip of strategy taking hold of her chest. The panic was gone. The predatory thrill was back. Everyone can build a Russo loop. But who has the capital to mine the neodymium? Who has the supply chains to manufacture the copper coiling at an industrial scale? Who owns the massive, empty waterfront warehouses in this city that could be converted into manufacturing floors tomorrow? The boardroom fell dead silent. The panic began to curdle into realization. "He broke the software monopoly," Valerie said softly. "So we pivot to hardware. We don't sell the power anymore. We sell the engines." She grabbed her coat from the back of her chair. "Where are you going?" Richard asked. His voice entirely changed. Weak, dependent. "To hire a chief engineer," she said. The rain had stopped, leaving South 9th Street smelling of wet ozone and decaying garbage. Valerie didn't take the town car this time. She drove her own SUV, parking it 2 blocks away, to avoid the handful of freelance journalists who were still staking out the perimeter of the garage. She walked the rest of the way. She wore heavy leather boots and a dark, unremarkable trench coat. She walked around to the alleyway behind the shop. The back door was a heavy slab of steel, dented and scarred. She knocked. 3 sharp raps. She waited. A minute passed. She knocked again. The deadbolt slid back with a heavy, grinding clack. The door opened a few inches. Dean stood in the gap. He looked worse than he had 3 days ago. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw covered in a thick, uneven scruff. The smell of cheap coffee and metallic dust rolled out from the dark interior. He saw her. His expression didn't change. He just moved to close the door. Valerie shoved her heavy boot into the gap. The steel pinched the toe of the leather hard, but she didn't flinch. "I'm not here for your patent, Dean," she said, her voice low. "I couldn't buy it if I wanted to." "Then there's nothing to talk about. Take your foot out of my door." "Your daughter has a chest infection," Valerie said. Dean froze. The hostility in his eyes fractured, replaced instantly by a sharp, defensive panic. "How do you—" "I heard her coughing when I was here. I'm observant." Valerie pushed the door open slightly, feeling his resistance weaken. "You gave the world a miracle, Dean. You're a hero on the forums, but you're standing in a building that's literally rotting around you, and you don't have the cash to fix the drywall. You won. You beat me. Now let me in." He stared at her for a long, heavy moment. The internal contradiction was written all over his face. The righteous savior of the grid, paralyzed by the mundane terror of poverty. Slowly, he stepped back. Valerie walked in. The garage was different now. The massive prototype was uncovered, spinning silently in the center of the room, casting its cold blue light across the rusted tools and bald tires. It was beautiful in a savage, unrefined way. "You tanked my company's stock by 40%, Valerie said, walking slowly around the machine. She could feel the kinetic hum vibrating in her teeth. "Good," Dean rasped. He walked over to the workbench and leaned against it, crossing his arms. "It was a brilliant move. Emotionally satisfying, I'm sure." Valerie stopped and looked at him. "But you're an engineer, not a manufacturer. You built one. How long did it take you to source the parts for this? 6 months? A year?" 14 months, Dean admitted quietly. "Exactly." Valerie stepped closer. The smell of oil and ozone surrounded them. "The schematic is public. But the world doesn't want to build these things in their garages, Dean. They want to buy them. The city hospitals need commercial-scale units. The residential grids need industrial hubs. You gave away the math, but someone still has to bend the steel." Dean's eyes narrowed. "You want to mass-produce it. I have the supply lines. I have the capital. I have the empty waterfront development that is entirely useless to me now as residential real estate." Valerie locked eyes with him. She stripped away the corporate veneer. She showed him the raw, unapologetic truth. "I don't care about the monopoly anymore. I care about the market share. We gut my luxury condos. We build a factory. Stanton Holdings becomes Stanton Manufacturing." "And what do you need me for?" Dean spat, though the venom lacked its previous heat. "You have my blueprints. Hire your own engineers." "Because you know the inefficiencies," Valerie shot back. "You know how it scales, and because if I try to manufacture it without you, the public will crucify me. But if the creator, the man who gave it to the world for free, is running the production lines to ensure quality and equitable distribution, they'll buy every single unit we can press." Dean looked away. He looked up at the ceiling, toward the apartment where Chloe was sleeping. The dripping of water from the leaky roof echoed faintly in the cavernous room. "I won't work for you," he said. His voice was thick. "You won't," Valerie agreed. "You'll be a partner, 50-50 on the manufacturing subsidiary. You set the safety standards, you dictate the municipal pricing structure so the hospitals get what they need at cost." She paused, letting the silence hang in the blue-lit room. "And I handle the aggressive commercial rollout so that neither of us ever has to worry about money again." It wasn't a hero's agreement. It was messy. It was compromised. Dean was making a deal with the devil he had just tried to kill. Valerie was handing half her empire to a man she despised, just to survive the fire he had started. Dean looked down at his oil-stained hands. He thought about the cold in Chloe's room. He thought about the backup generators at the hospital all those years ago. He realized that changing the world wasn't a single, explosive act. It was a long, dirty compromise. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a crushed pack of peppermint gum, and popped a piece into his mouth. He chewed slowly. "The commercial units," Dean said, his voice gravelly, "cannot use synthetic casing. It disrupts the magnetic resonance. It has to be brushed steel." Valerie felt a sharp, profound wave of relief wash over her. She didn't smile. She just nodded. "I'll have my people source the steel tomorrow," she said. They stood there in the blue light of the pulsing machine. They didn't shake hands. They didn't need to. The contract was sealed in the shared, unglamorous reality of their mutual survival. The garage was still filled with scrap metal, but now it was the foundation of a new world. Did Dean make the right choice by giving the technology away, or should he have taken the millions to secure his daughter's future? Let me know who you think really won this negotiation in the comments below. If this story hooked you, hit that like button, share it with someone who loves a good underdog story, and make sure to subscribe for more original, hard-hitting storytelling. See you in the next one.